are on air, as long as I see this green pulsating light down there. So hello. We are doing our third week question and answer on the climate change and health MOOC. And thanks again for your answers. And I see increasingly how you interact with each other. So for each other's questions, for example, Angrai Neve, I hope I pronounced that correctly, answered to another colleague, and some of the answers were absolutely right. Some were sort of right, but it doesn't matter as long as we debate as in a real personal face-to-face. That shows your interest, your engagement, your really interested debate. So let me, a couple of your questions which are a little bit difficult, admittedly. And there were some errors in the platform, not really accommodate text answers. So apologies for this. This is my first time I work with that company, Iversity, and they guided me how to do better in the next time. So let's see. First question that I would like to discuss with you is how the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, managed to measure emissions. And that is a question that is very, very important to understand, not only for emissions, but also for household emissions, on which there were another set of questions. So let me share with you, I hope it works, a full graph which the NHS in their report, which I put on the internet today. So today, all the resources I'm discussing with you, you find them on the Iversity platform as we speak. It is the NHS 2008, the first report ever of a country which looked into what the health sector contributes in terms of emissions. We share this graph, which is about how the emissions of a car are evaluated according to the Kyoto Protocol, which stipulated the rules how to measure emissions. And you're perfectly right. You thought, oh, it's cement industry, it's car industry, it is those who generate visibly, who produce stuff that then pollute the atmosphere, with emissions, and that is, of course, only half the equation. And if you did it this way, then all the consumers who, by their decisions, enormously influence the carbon footprint of this planet would be exculpated. You'd say, okay, he buys a car, and we only sort of make him accountable, puts in, and the CO2 that gets out at the end of the car, the exhaust. That is not how things are done. And let me show you this wonderfully simple graph. Here we go. So I hope you see this all. You see a car. If you look at the box to the last part, one to the right, car use, you would think, most people would think, and I thought this before I a little bit got into the topic, that I can only be held responsible for, well, the use of the car. I pollute by the emission that come out of the. But do you know how much CO2 is emitted, not produced, is emitted by manufacturing? Am I responsible for this? The answer is, so to the right, the car manufacturer, a very large chunk of the lifetime, we're talking about lifetime emissions, and then fabrication. Somebody has to produce it, that also emits CO2. And then somebody has to produce, let's say, the steel. The car is an enormous decision to buy a car. I am responsible of a lot more than just what comes out of the exhaust. And even more, after the car goes to the junkyard, well, at some stage it will be pressed and recycled, but this also uses energy and emits CO2. So please think about this lifetime assessment, and you and I, the consumers, we are held responsible of the entire chain, because our decision to buy a car and to drive it is what triggered the whole thing. If fewer people would would buy a car and take the bus or whatever, there would be much. You know, I argued with my kids who always told me, well, Rainer, you're into this climate business, but you drive a car. And a little Volkswagen, old Volkswagen bus. And I said, well, I have a car, but I drive only 5,000 kilometers a year with you, with family vacations and so forth. I have 4 kids, so we need a big car. And so, but just by standing around, I don't emit. That was wrong. True, I don't emit while I stand around, but by having a car, having purchased a car, I have triggered emission upstream, and will trigger, once it's in the junkyard, a lot of car disposal emissions. So keep this in mind, and that holds also true for the question, how come 50% of the household, of all country emissions are generated by households? And that is the answer to that question too. Because if we buy, let's say, a freezer, it is not only the electricity and the CO2 emitted by generating this electricity that counts, but also the manufacture, the steel and everything, you see. And there is a logic to it, because our consumption behavior triggers all these things. Without me buying a car, without me buying a fridge, these emissions wouldn't have happened. So there would be less demand for cars, and these emissions would all go down. Not only the emissions from my little car in the box to the right. Yeah. Okay, that's an important principle. Now let's see whether I can get back to the big screen. Yes. Now I answered these 2 questions here with the one picture from the car and what contributes to emissions. The next question is on El Nino, La Nina. And first of all, let me just rehearse. Weather is the current state of the atmosphere. You look out of the window and, well, here the sun is shining, it's cold, cloudy, and so forth. Then you have seasonal changes. Winter, summer, rainy season, dry season. That the next larger of aggregated weather, if you like, is interannual variation, and that is one of the most important, not the only one, is the El Nino La Nina phenomenon, which is a phenomenon that goes all around the globe. It was means the Christ arriving, the child. And it was named that way because it was so obvious that the water temperature changed off the coast of Peru that they gave the name without knowing how exactly this would happen. Now we know that this is all around the globe. There is a transmission belt of currents that are warm, that are colder, and so there is a variation around. In climate that is interannual, maybe every 2-3 years. The next bigger change is climate. Now the big difference is climate is irreversible. I've told you so often, and so important. And the others are fluctuating up and down and up and down. And you can learn a lot. We can learn a lot for the lower scale variation. Well, I shouldn't say climate, weather. And because those diseases that are susceptible here, very likely, it's not completely causally sort of proven, but are most likely to react also to climate change. As much as it's correct to say, at least those diseases with seasons, malaria, dengue, are also likely to oscillate or to increase with climate change. That is just a rough estimate, but there's a lot of plausibility. And of course, we know now today much more about these things than when people first had the idea, oh, there's more dengue here, maybe there will also be. So I put on the website the paper, and I think I also Professor Antoine, my colleague Antoine Flahaut, put it on in his reading list. Check please, he has 4 papers, 2 essential readings and 2 deep dives, as we say. And I didn't have the time to check really whether he put this paper on the list. But this is the paper that inspires me, and you find it on the list. And if I find it on my table, I can quote and explain that to you. So he looked at the variations of influenza in France, not in Peru and not in the Philippines, as all countries, to various extents, are influenced by it. By the way, this year is a terrible phenomenon, which in one part of the world causes drought, Ethiopia for the moment, in others inundations, and all the diseases that go with it. Cholera, for example, is triggered by El Niño. So El Niño is a very health relevant event or phenomenon, and it forebodes, it lets us see how many diseases will react to climate change. The only thing is climate change is irreversible, and El Niño goes up and down, as bad as the consequences may be, but at some stage it is reversed. So he looked at, it's a statistical epidemiological study, he looked at all the cases, mind you, millions of cases of influenza in France over a couple of years, 1971 to 2002. Yeah. And he looked also at the subtypes, because there are many genetic variations in influenza viruses. And without having a clear ex ante sort of previously be this and this will cause this, he just looked at correlations, and correlations is very often as close as we get to causal influence. Of course, in statistics, you can never say A causes B. You can only very cleverly measure things so that you can say, well, it is very likely, and I can even that this is related, associated, if you have a time sequence, if El Niño was there before and influenza changes were there afterwards, and then it becomes plausible. There are some criteria for attributing causality, but you can never ever do it on statistics alone. So he saw correlations when the temperature went down, which is something that everybody living in climates know, that influenza goes up when it's colder. Well, the question was now, how does the virus know, or is the virus adapted to cold? That is, of course, a good question, but it's more complex than that. Because if it's cold, there are many more things that happen with regard to disease transmission. People huddle to stay home. They let the air in less frequently than in the summer. So if there is a virus, and if everything else was equal, the virus has a much bigger chance to jump from one to the next in the winter. So it is it's not the temperature alone. Then the mucosa are less well guarded because it's very cold air for our immune system to react. And so you cannot say the virus itself likes cold or likes warm. It is the fact that disease is transmitted more easily in the cold and the warm. Yeah. So that's my answer to this. But it points out to a general issue that I want to emphasize here. Very often things are so complex that you cannot say A causes B, and because the virus causes disease transmission is not just one bug jumping from A to B. There are many more behavioral, environmental, temperature is one of them, systems. For example, in malaria, we know exactly that it's really temperature that not only shortens the life cycle of the larva, which will become a mosquito in the water, but then warm water. It shortens. There's more mosquitoes are generated from a pond. Also, it shortens the cycle of the plasmodium, which is the bug that transmits malaria, in the mosquito. So one mosquito can now transmit twice. Usually, nature had harmonized, if you like, the lifespan of the mosquito and the life cycle time of the bug for maturation to be then transmitted by the second blood meal. You see, so there was one blood meal. By the way, the mosquito also gets mild fever and whatever, mild symptoms. It's not completely healthy, it suffers a little bit. But it survives long enough for the cycle. There's a whole cycle of growing and dividing and so forth, and differentiating of the plasmodium in the mosquito's gut. Until it's ready, then it goes to the saliva gland. Second time a mosquito really accomplishes the spread of that bug is when it sucks and it has a blood meal or somebody else. Now, if this is now smaller, shorter, this can happen twice, for example. So we know exactly, and by the way, they also get wild mosquitoes. They sting or they suck blood more often. So it's here we know mechanistically exactly how this works. Mosquito biting behavior, speed of cycle in the mosquito, development of larvae speeding up. We also know that when it gets very hot, the survival time of mosquitoes goes down. It gets so hot. So complex. And this course is introductory. We want to for more knowledge. And again, the next course, the last presence course, so face-to-face course in Heidelberg will be taught this June. Which, by the way, very nice time in Heidelberg. This June in Heidelberg, our website, if you Google Public Health Heidelberg, our website, the institute comes up, and then you go to teaching, and then you can register. If you want to, I can reduce your part of my student group, and the students get a reduced rate. So this course will dig a little bit deeper, and then in the end, if you still have more, I think you should do research and find out yourself with colleagues how things are really working. Okay, this was the question on El Nino. Now another question which I thought should be in this kind of forum is a very good question by somebody saying the polluter pays principle, now we're talking about policy, is regressive. Well, what does regressive mean? It means different things in different disciplines. And psychology, it means your behavior goes back to more immature, earlier stages of your development. In economics, and that is taken from economics here, regressive means if you raise a tax, for example, or you have a policy that the poor are more hit than the rich. Let's say if I increase the price of sugar, if I double it, the rich guy, can't care less whether he pays $1 or $5 for sugar. He doesn't even notice. The poor guy now he says, well, I have to take less sugar in my tea because for him it's palpable. So the same seemingly fair can be much harder on poor people than on the rich. That is called regressive. So these kinds of direct taxes, where you have product, are regressive. And there are also progressive policies. If you say, for example, we open soup kitchens for the poor, the rich will not take it. So it's okay. Now back to that. It is in fact regressive if we said every person and every country has to reduce the emissions according to what he or she produces. That what would that mean? I mean, yes, for the moment, the largest producer today is China. Second largest is the US, and the US goes down very steeply with emissions, and China is still going up. So that means really that China would have to pay the largest contribution to emission reduction, or paying, paying some money, sort of to make good pollution. But we have the principle equal pollution rights for every citizen of this world. That means it's not because China has 1.5 billion citizens that they can only emit as much as Liechtenstein or, let's say, Italy, which is one. Italy is 5% of the population of China. So it's a per capita thing. That's the first thing. You cannot say one country, let's say, because I'm Qatar, I have the right to pollute more. So the only thing that they could really agree on and understand is every citizen has that same right to pollute, and then they calculate how much can the planet sort of stand in terms of per capita pollution. And they say, okay, so many gigatons. And then they count it backwards. If the globe can only stand 3,000 gigatons, that's the right fact, for it to be below 2 degrees by the end of the century. And we have on the planet, so every person can pollute so much. Now, if you draw this line, of course, today it's not yet there. So you have to do two things by the end of the century. You have to, by the end of the century, we really have reached that pollution, that emission level per capita, where everybody ideally pollutes the same. And in the meantime, some like African countries, Mali, say Nepal, an Asian country, they can even emit more because they still are behind the curve of industrialization. They need more CO2 emission rights, like to roads, to build infrastructure, and so forth. So some countries go up, but not above this calculated per capita level, and other countries have to steeply go down. Like the US. Of course, the US has a capita emissions far higher than China, 3-4 times higher. So they need to. China does have to come down already on a per capita basis. So please understand that the pace when it comes to chemical pollution of rivers and other environmental hazards is very good there, but it is not. It cannot govern the debate and policies on mitigation. Then there is the other thing that I wanted to discuss with you. I asked you a question about give us a 10-line little essay on a special certain study. That didn't work in the platform, so don't be Don't feel frustrated. I didn't check with the operator of the platform before. I thought this was easy, but their sort of their question grading engine does not accommodate full text. And so I have to put retest only to test your own progress, not to grade. And it has to be altered. That's as it is. But a very nice lady told me that we can do it in a discussion forum. And that is, or in a question and answer format. And so I will reformat this in a discussion forum. The same thing that nobody has picked up yet because there is no reaction on so far. And that is the question which, where's the text? I asked you to ask a friend a little exercise which makes our course ever so much more interesting to be interactive. Dear course participants, I wrote it's. So if you look up exercises, chapter 3, you need to interview someone. Dear course participants, I would ask you to make an interview with a friend or family member. Find out what they think that they can contribute personally to reduce their carbon footprint. Same debate. What is their carbon footprint? What are they responsible for? What is attributed to them? And you will find that people, indeed, your friends and family, indeed, like everybody else, thinks, oh, okay, it's only what comes out of the exhaust, it's only what nature that is part of my carbon footprint. You now know better. So I then asked them to rank their options according to their preference and to actually change their behavior. So if you tell correct, yes, you should have a better insulation. Yes, you should open the windows so often if it's cold outside, or if it's air conditioning and it's hot outside. Yes, you should. Yes, you should maybe go more on foot and let your car in the garage and so forth. So you know qualitatively what the options are, and then you ask them, well, what is it? What's the motivation for you? Because none of these things is particularly exciting. You have to think about things. You have to force yourself to pay to have your house better insulated and so forth, or change your eating habits. So usually you see something that people don't like. They only like it if it saves them money, which is a matter of medicine. Or when they're convinced that they should do it because of the climate and other things. And now you know also if you talk to them in the family dinner or with friends, you should tell them, you know what's good for the climate is good for you. So if you walk, if you leave your car or leave whatever you are used to do in the garage, your motorbike, and you take your bike and walk, that is to make you fitter, cardiovascular, and so forth. So the benefits of mention and see what happens. Whether they are not okay, I didn't know that not eating red meat, that's also good for the climate. But it's my doctor tells me I should avoid red meat because of my cholesterol. So this synergies between health and climate policies, these are maybe something you want to tease up. And I'm very keen to listen to you and read your answers. And I will give you the next message. I will give you the large 4-country study that I'm doing, where we just ask this question in a more strict and better sample and clear categories and so forth, where we do the household carbon footprint first with the family in front of everybody. And the next week you come back and we will look at 65 options to reduce your carbon footprint. And if you want, I can quickly 65 options on the internet. So you see how much we can do. And we will, since we have measured the carbon before, we then know how much the house is so big, and if they change the windows, so this will reduce your carbon. It will cost so much, and in about half of the options, not quite half, there is also an improvement in health. Of course, we don't say longer, but we say, well, that's a very strong impact on health. If you set your goal to 15 kilometers, 5 kilometers to work on foot, that gives you really strong positive health benefit. If you eat less red meat, cancer and so forth. So we tell them, like on a scale from 0 to 10, how good it is. And then we try to tease out what is it that makes people select a carbon reduction measure. Is it because it's cheap? Is it because it saves a lot of CO2? I want to save the planet after all. Or is it because I want to be healthy at the same time? I want to generate a benefit. Or is it all of the above? So stay tuned. Next time, hello.